you're stuck. Not because you don't have information. You've researched, you've made lists, you've talked to people, but you still can't decide because you're waiting for something that will never arrive. Certainty. Should you take the job that might transform your career or might be a disaster? Should you commit to the relationship or keep your options open? Should you make the move, the investment, the change, or stay where you are? And here's what's actually happening in your mind. You made uncertainty itself the excuse to avoid choosing. You tell yourself you need more data, more time, more clarity. But the real issue isn't information. It's that you're using an impossible standard, absolute certainty, as permission to stay paralyzed. Pascal saw this. And the framework everyone knows as Pascal's wager, the argument about believing in God, is actually something much bigger. It's a decision-making architecture for impossible choices. And once you understand how it actually works, you can use it to break through paralysis in any high-stakes situation where certainty isn't coming. This isn't about religion. This is about making the choice when you don't have the luxury of knowing how it turns out. Let's rebuild the wager from the ground up, and then I'm going to show you exactly how to use it. Here's what most people think Pascal's wager is. Believe in God because if you're wrong, you lose nothing. But if you're right, you gain everything. So it's a safe bet. And then the objections flood in. That's cynical. You can't force belief. What if you pick the wrong God? But notice what all of these responses assume. That the wager is trying to prove God exists or manipulate you into fake belief. That's not what Pascal was doing. Pascal was addressing a specific person. Someone who cannot achieve certainty about God's existence, but who must make a decision anyway, because not choosing is itself a choice. You live as if God exists or as if God doesn't. There's no neutral position. So the wager is an argument for God's existence. It's a framework for deciding what to do when you can't know for sure. And that structure, deciding under unavoidable uncertainty with asymmetric outcomes, applies to far more than theology. It applies to every situation where certainty is impossible. The stakes are high. Doing nothing is effectively a choice, and the outcomes are radically asymmetric. Career pivots, relationships, investments, confrontations, life direction. The question isn't, does God exist? The question is, what do you do when the choice is unavoidable and the information is insufficient? Pascal's answer: you analyze the decision rationally anyway. You look at potential outcomes. You assess probabilities as best you can, and you choose the path where the risk-reward structure makes sense, even without certainty. Let's extract the method. Here's the skeleton of Pascal's reasoning. Strip the theological content. You face a binary choice. Let's call the options A and B. You cannot know with certainty which option is correct, but you must choose, because an action defaults to one option or the other. Each option has potential outcomes, and those outcomes are asymmetric. One path has a capped downside and massive upside. The other has a capped upside and potentially catastrophic downside. When outcomes are asymmetric like this, the rational move isn't to wait for certainty. It's to choose the path where you can live with the worst-case scenario and where the best-case scenario is transformational. This is probabilistic reasoning under uncertainty. And it's not about mathematical precision. It's about structured thinking that prevents you from defaulting to paralysis. Pascal's original wager works like this. Option A. Live as if God exists. This means faith, moral commitment, reoriented priorities. If correct, infinite gain, eternal life, relationship with God, ultimate meaning. If incorrect, finite loss, some time, effort, foregone pleasures, but you still lived a coherent, meaningful life. Option B. Live as if God doesn't exist. If correct, finite gain, freedom from religious obligations, intellectual consistency with materialism. If incorrect, infinite loss, separation from God, missed ultimate purpose, existential regret. The asymmetry is obvious. The potential loss on one side is bounded. The potential loss on the other side is unbounded. So even if you assign a low probability to God's existence, say 10%, 5%, even 1%, the math still favors a choice with infinite upside and finite downside. Now strip away the theology. What you're left with is a decision matrix. First, identify the unavoidable binary choice. Second, map the potential outcomes of each option. Third, assess the asymmetry. Which path is bounded risk? Which is unbounded risk? Fourth, choose the option where you can live with the worst case and access the transformational best case. This is the tool. Let's use it. Here's how to structure any impossible decision using Pascal's framework. Draw a simple 2x2 matrix. Across the top, the two possible states of reality, the thing you can't know for sure. Down the side, your two possible choices, the actions you can take. In each quadrant, you write the outcome. What happens if you choose X and reality turns out to be Y? Let's make this concrete. Imagine you're considering a major career change, leaving a stable job to start business. The uncertainty, will the business succeed or fail? You can't know. The choice, take the leap or stay in the stable job. The matrix looks like this. If you start the business and it succeeds, financial independence, fulfillment, pride. If you start the business and it fails, financial loss, but skills and experience gained, no regret about not trying. If you stay in the stable job and the business would have succeeded, steady income, but lifelong what if? If you stay in the stable job and the business would have failed, steady income, but still a lifelong what if? Now look at the asymmetry. If you start the business and it succeeds, transformational upside. If you start the business and it fails, you lose money, but you gain skills, experience, clarity. You know you tried. The loss is bounded. If you stay in a job and the business would have succeeded, you never know, and you live with regret. The psychological cost is unbounded. It follows you forever. If you stay in the job and the business would have failed, you're safe, but you still wonder. The regret is smaller but present. The asymmetry favors taking the risk if you can afford the bounded loss. This is the wager structure applied to career. But notice, this doesn't tell you start the business. It tells you to analyze the structure of the choice and see where the asymmetry lies. If the financial loss would destroy you, the downside isn't bounded, it's catastrophic. Then the choice changes. The matrix forces clarity. It prevents you from pretending both options are equal when they're not. Let's go deeper. Take the example further. You're mid-career. The job is fine. Pays well, respected position, clear path forward. But you've been developing a skill on the side, and there's an opportunity to go independent. The risk is real. You might fail. You might lose income, status, security. Most people get stuck here because they're demanding certainty. Will I succeed? You'll never have that answer, but you can map the decision. The two realities you can't control. First, the independent path works. You build something meaningful and financially viable. Second, the independent path doesn't work. The market doesn't respond. The income doesn't materialize. Your two choices: make the jump or stay where you are. The matrix. If you make the jump and the independent path works, financial autonomy, creative control, deep fulfillment, you became who you wanted to be. If you make the jump and the independent path fails, financial setback, but no lifelong regret. You return to employment with new skills, maturity, self-respect. If you stay in a job and the independent path would have worked, financial stability, but permanent what if? You watch others do what you were afraid to try. If you stay in a job and the independent path would have failed, financial stability, psychological relief that you avoided risk, but the question never leaves, could I have done it? Now the asymmetry becomes visible. The worst case if you jump, time-limited financial loss, but psychological closure and skill gain. The worst case if you stay, permanent psychological cost of not knowing. If you can survive the financial loss, if it won't destroy your life, the wager favors a jump, not because success is certain, Because the structure of the choice puts unbounded regret on the stay side and bounded loss on the jump side. This is what Pascal forces you to see. Inaction has a cost too, and sometimes that cost is worse than the risk. But let's test the method on something harder. You've been dating someone for 2 years. It's good, not perfect, but real. You care about them. They care about you. But you're afraid, what if this isn't the one? What if you commit and it ends badly? What if you're settling? So you wait for certainty. And certainty doesn't come. Here's the wager structure. The two realities you can't control. First, this relationship, if committed to, becomes a deep, lifelong partnership. Second, this relationship, even with commitment, eventually ends. Your two choices: commit fully, emotionally, publicly, with long-term intent, or keep your options open. Stay but hedge, avoid full vulnerability. The matrix. If you commit fully and the relationship becomes a lifelong partnership, deep intimacy, shared life, no regret. You experienced real love. If you commit fully and the relationship eventually ends, painful breakup, but you loved honestly. You know you gave it everything. No, what if I had tried harder? If you keep your options open and the relationship becomes a lifelong partnership, you stay together, but the relationship never deepens. You're always half in. The potential is never realized. If you keep your options open and the relationship eventually ends, breakup still happens, but now with the added weight. I never really tried. I was afraid the whole time. The asymmetry. If you commit and it works. Transformational. If you commit and it fails. Painful but clean. You loved fully. You have no regret about your own effort. If you hedge and it works, it doesn't actually work. You stayed surface level. You never access the depth. If you hedge and it fails, you failed and you never really tried. Double regret. The wager says, if you can survive the pain of a committed relationship ending, full commitment is the rational choice. Because hedging guarantees you lose either way. This is where Pascal's framework cuts deepest. It exposes the cost of self-protection. The person who refuses to commit because they're afraid of heartbreak doesn't avoid pain. They guarantee a different kind of pain. Shallow relationships and perpetual what if. The wager doesn't promise safety. It shows you which risk is worth taking. Here's the pattern to extract. Pascal's wager works when outcomes are radically asymmetric. When one path is capped downside and massive upside, and the other is capped upside and potentially unbounded downside. This is a skill you're learning. Spotting asymmetry. Most people treat decisions as symmetrical. Both options have pros and cons, so I'll wait for more information. But many high-stakes decisions aren't symmetrical. Starting a business versus staying employed, asymmetric. Bounded financial loss versus unbounded regret. Committing to a relationship versus hedging, asymmetric. Clean potential failure versus guaranteed mediocrity. Having a difficult conversation versus avoiding it, asymmetric. Temporary discomfort versus permanent resentment. Pursuing a creative project versus waiting until you're ready, asymmetric. Recoverable failure versus lifelong wondering. The wager trains you to ask, which choice has a worst-case scenario I can survive and a best-case scenario that transforms my life? And then, which choice has outcomes that are permanently costly, even if they feel safer right now? When you spot asymmetry, the decision becomes clearer. You're not choosing based on certainty. You're choosing based on which uncertainty you can live with. This is rational decision-making under unavoidable risk. And it's how you break paralysis. But the wager isn't a magic formula. It can be misused. Let's prevent that. First trap. Infinite upside doesn't mean anything goes. Just because one option could be transformational doesn't mean it's rational to take it. You still need a plausible path to the upside, not lottery ticket thinking, and a genuinely bounded downside, not catastrophic loss disguised as risk. Example. I'll quit my job with no savings and no plan because my business could succeed. That's not Pascal's wager. That's recklessness pretending to be courage. The downside isn't bounded. It's potentially catastrophic. Homelessness, destroyed relationships, unrecoverable debt. The wager requires honest assessment of whether you can survive the worst case. Second trap, using the wager to avoid emotional work. The wager doesn't replace discernment. You can't use it to rationalize staying in a toxic relationship because what if it gets better? If the current reality is causing harm and the best case requires the other person fundamentally changing, you're not facing asymmetric outcomes. You're avoiding the truth. The wager works when the uncertainty is external. Market success, another person's response, future unknowns. It doesn't work when you're using uncertainty to avoid facing what you already know. Third trap, treating all decisions as binary. Not every decision fits the wager structure. Some choices have more than two options. Some have symmetrical outcomes. Some require incremental exploration, not all-or-nothing commitment. The wager is for high-stakes, unavoidable choice where inaction equals a default decision, asymmetric outcomes, and uncertainty that won't resolve before you must decide. If the decision doesn't meet those criteria, don't force the framework. Use the right tool for the job. Here's the final piece. The wager doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It teaches you how to choose despite it. And once you choose, you have to live with not knowing if you were right. This is where most people break down. They make the decision, then spend years second-guessing, watching for signs they were wrong, keeping one foot out the door. But that's not decision-making. That's extended paralysis with a different name. Pascal's framework includes a post-decision discipline. Once you choose based on the asymmetry, you commit to the choice as if it were certain, not because it is certain, because commitment itself is part of what makes the upside possible. If you take the job but spend every day wondering if you should have stayed, you guarantee failure. If you commit to the relationship but keep scanning for better options, you guarantee shallow connection. The wager says, analyze rationally, then commit fully. This is what it means to live with uncertainty honestly. You acknowledge you don't know how it will turn out. You map the asymmetry. You choose the path with bounded downside and transformational upside. And then you give that choice everything you have. Not blind faith, informed commitment. You chose the option where, even if it fails, you can say, I made the rational choice with the information I had. I lived it fully. I have no regret. That's the stability the wager provides. Not certainty, not proof. Rational confidence in an uncertain world. And that's enough. You've been waiting for certainty because you thought that's what responsible decision-making required. But certainty isn't the standard. Rational structure is the standard. And Pascal gives you that structure. Map the choice. Identify the asymmetry. Choose the path where the worst case is survivable and the best case is transformational. Then commit as if you were certain. Not because you are certain. Because commitment is what makes the upside possible. This is what it means to decide like an adult in a world that doesn't hand you answers. You don't wait for permission from the universe. You analyze the structure of the choice, and you give yourself permission to decide. The wager isn't about God or mathematics or philosophical proof. It's about this. You can make the impossible decision. You have the tools. And the cost of not choosing is higher than you think. Stop waiting. Choose.